The first sign of trouble came when Instructor Ron noted the flashing red indicator on his student roster. A human, on his survival training rotation. The seven-limbed Orwellian clicked his mandibles in frustration, creating a sound not unlike two jagged rocks being ground together. "Absolutely unacceptable," he muttered, his translucent appendages fluttering in agitation. 417 rotations since humans joined the Galactic Alliance, and they still insist on sending their kind to positions they cannot possibly fulfill. The sleek corridors of the Alliance Academy gleamed around him as he navigated toward the administrative center, determined to correct what must surely be a clerical error. Humans were barely tolerated within the Alliance. Their homeworld was classified as a Deathworld. After all, a bacterial cesspool where even the atmosphere contained corrosive elements. The creatures themselves were fragile, possessing neither natural armor nor significant muscular density compared to most Alliance species. Yet there it was, blinking stubbornly on his display. Cadet Marikale, Terra Origin, assigned to survival training on Epsilon 9's northern sector. Ron entered the administrative chamber, where Director Voss, a hulking taurid with glittering scales that shifted from emerald to azure depending on the light, was reviewing holographic displays. "Director, there appears to be an error in the upcoming survival rotation assignments," Ron began, extending his datapad. The taurid's four eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture of mild annoyance. "There is no error, Instructor Ron. But a human on Epsilon 9? The environment alone would... The human cadet has been cleared by medical... Her physiological parameters have been evaluated and deemed sufficient for the training exercise." Rain's exoskeleton seemed to tighten around him. "Director, with all due respect, the northern sector contains multiple Zyrak hunting packs. Even our strongest cadets struggle with..." "The assignment stands," Director Voss interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. "The Alliance Council has mandated full integration of all member species into all training protocols. If Cadet Kale cannot complete the exercise, then she will fail, just as any other cadet would." "And when she dies on the surface?" Ron asked, unable to keep the acid from his tone. Director Voss fixed him with all four eyes. "Then, she fails in the most permanent way. But that is not your concern. Instructor, your duty is to prepare and evaluate, not to prejudge." Rand clicked his mandibles again, this time in reluctant acquiescence. "As you wish, Director. I will make the necessary preparations." As he left the administrative center, Ron's mind was already calculating the most efficient way to document the inevitable failure. If humans wanted to pretend they belonged among the stars with the true spacefaring races, they would have to learn their limitations the hard way. And Epsilon 9 was nothing if not an unforgiving teacher. Cadet Marikale stood at perfect attention, her Alliance-issue environmental suit fitting her human form awkwardly. Unlike the other cadets, whose suits melded seamlessly with their varied physiologies, Mara's appeared to hang from her frame like an afterthought. The suit's adaptive materials had struggled to conform to human proportions, leaving slight bulges at the joints and a distinct gap at the neckline that had required additional sealing. "Cadet Kale," Instructor Ron's voice held the distinct tone of someone addressing a particularly disappointing specimen. "Are you prepared for your survival assessment?" "Yes, Instructor," Mara replied, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. She was the only human in her class, the only human many of her fellow cadets had ever seen outside of information feeds. "The parameters of your assessment are as follows," Rahan continued, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the harsh, artificial light of the briefing chamber. "You will be transported to the northern sector of Epsilon 9. You will remain there, alone, for 3 complete rotations. You will establish shelter, secure sustenance, and avoid becoming sustenance yourself." A ripple of amusement passed through the assembled non-human cadets. The region is inhabited by a Zirak hunting pack. They are apex predators, highly intelligent, and extremely territorial. Mara nodded, her face betraying no emotion. She had studied the Zirak extensively, six-limbed creatures with dual-hinged jaws and infrared sensory pits, capable of coordinated pack hunting tactics that rivaled those of Earth's wolves. The standard survival kit contains a multi-tool, nutrient bars for one rotation, a water purifier, and a locator beacon for emergency extraction. Ron's voice took on a note of condescension. Though I must stress that activating the beacon constitutes an automatic failure of the assessment. Understood, Instructor, Mara replied. Do you have any questions, Cadet Kale? The way Ron emphasized her name made it sound like a diagnosis. Just one, Instructor, Mara said. What is the record for highest survival assessment score in this sector? A ripple of disbelief passed through the other cadets. Ron's mandibles clicked rapidly, the Orwellian equivalent of a derisive snort. Cadet Vril, 3 stellar cycles ago. He not only survived but managed to document complete Zirak hunting patterns and returned with several territorial markers. Ron's appendages waved dismissively. However, Cadet Vril is Draxian. Their species evolved in high-gravity, predator-rich environments, not unlike Epsilon 9. Thank you, Instructor, Mara said simply. One final note. Cadet, Ron added. Alliance protocols permit me to offer you an alternative assessment, given your physiological limitations. His tone made it clear what he thought of those limitations. You may opt for a simulated survival scenario instead. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew what Ron was offering, a face-saving way out, a tacit acknowledgement that humans weren't expected to measure up to the same standards as other species. Taking the simulation would be an admission that humans were, indeed, the lesser species many in the Alliance believed them to be. Mara met the instructor's gaze unflinchingly. I appreciate the consideration, Instructor, but I'll take the standard assessment. Rian's mandibles clicked in what might have been disappointment. Very well. Report to Transport Bay 3 in 1 standard hour. Dismissed. As the cadets filed out, Mara felt the weight of eyes upon her. Some curious, some pitying, some openly hostile. She had known this moment would come when she'd applied to the Academy. Humans were still novelties in the Galactic Alliance, barely tolerated and widely underestimated. In her quarters, Mara packed methodically, adding a few items of her own to the standard survival kit. A small metal container of dried herb leaves from Earth, a tightly folded thermal blanket that had been in her family for generations, a simple metal cylinder that had belonged to her grandfather. Her roommate, Srel, a lithe centaurian with pearlescent skin and elongated limbs, watched her with evident concern. You don't have to do this, you know, Srel said, her voice musical, even through the translator. Instructor Ron is setting you up to fail. Probably, Mara agreed, continuing to pack. Then why go through with it? Take the simulation. No one would blame you. Mara paused, looking up at her roommate. That's exactly why I can't take it, Srel. Because no one would blame me. Because it's what they expect. She sealed her pack with a decisive click. 417 rotations, and humans are still fighting for real acceptance in the Alliance. Someone has to go first. Srel's bioluminescent patterns shifted in a pattern that indicated reluctant admiration. Your species is strangely stubborn. You have no idea, Mara replied with a small smile. Wish me luck? The Centaurian made a complex gesture with 3 of her limbs, a traditional blessing for travelers. May the void hold no shadows for you, Mara Kale of Terra. Mara nodded gratefully and headed for the transport bay, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her through the corridors. In the bay, Instructor Ron waited by a small transport shuttle, his expression unreadable behind his alien features. "Cadet Kale," he acknowledged curtly. "Board the shuttle." As they rose from the Academy's floating complex and headed toward Epsilon 9's forbidding surface, Ron spoke without looking at her. "I want to be clear, Cadet. I did not choose this assignment for you out of malice." "I understand, Instructor," Mara replied. "You chose it because you believe I will fail, and you want that failure properly documented." The Orvelian's head swiveled toward her, his compound eyes gleaming. "Perceptive. Then you understand this is not personal." "It rarely is, Instructor." Mara kept her gaze fixed on the approaching moon's surface, a landscape of purple-hued vegetation and jagged rock formations. "Prejudice seldom feels personal to those who hold it." Ron made that clicking sound again. "Spare me your Terran philosophy, Cadet. I deal in observable facts. And the fact is, humans lack the physical attributes necessary for survival in hostile environments. Your species required technology to overcome even the predators of your own world." "Yes," Mara agreed. "We did." "And you will have minimal technology on Epsilon 9. I'll manage." The shuttle began its descent toward a small clearing amidst the violet foliage. "Your extraction point will be here, in exactly 3 rotations," Ron said. "Assuming you return." "I'll be here," Mara said simply. The shuttle touched down with a gentle bump. The hatch slid open, revealing the alien landscape beyond, a world of deep purples and blues, where strange, fern-like plants swayed under the dim light of a distant gas giant that dominated the sky. "Your assessment begins now, Cadet," Ron said as Mara stepped toward the hatch. "Do you have any final questions?" Mara turned back to him, her face illuminated by the strange light of Epsilon 9. "Just one, Instructor. When I complete this assessment successfully, will you reconsider your views on human capabilities?" Rihan's mandibles moved in what might have been amusement. "If you survive, Cadet Kale, I will personally recommend you for the Tactical Vanguard program." It was an empty promise. They both knew it. The Tactical Vanguard was the elite of the elite, comprised almost exclusively of species from high-gravity, predator-evolved worlds. "I'll hold you to that, Instructor," Mara said, and stepped out onto the alien soil. The shuttle's hatch closed behind her, with a finality that sent a shiver down her spine. As the craft rose into the sky, Mara took stock of her surroundings. The clearing was roughly circular, about 20 meters in diameter, bordered by the thick, fern-like vegetation that seemed to dominate Epsilon 9's flora. The air, though filtered through her suit, carried unfamiliar scents, something metallic and sharp underneath a musky sweetness. First priority, shelter. The violet ferns grew to nearly 3 meters tall, their fronds weaving together to form natural canopies. Mara moved to the edge of the clearing, examining the plants carefully without touching them. Some Epsilon 9 vegetation was known to be toxic to most carbon-based life forms. Using her multi-tool, she carefully harvested several fronds from plants she recognized as non-toxic varieties. The material was surprisingly sturdy, almost leathery in texture. She set about constructing a simple lean-to against a rock formation at the clearing's edge, using techniques her grandfather had taught her during camping trips in Earth's still wild regions. Within 2 hours, she had established a basic shelter that would provide protection from Epsilon 9's frequent acid rain showers. Next, water. Her scanner indicated a small stream approximately 300 meters east of her position. Gathering her purifier, she made her way cautiously through the dense vegetation. The stream was narrow but swift, its waters a deep cobalt blue that seemed to shimmer with inner light. Kneeling beside it, Mara activated her purifier and began filling her water containers. As she worked, she maintained constant awareness of her surroundings. noting every sound and movement in the alien forest. A rustling in the vegetation across the stream caught her attention. Slowly, without making sudden movements, she raised her head. A small, six-legged creature, resembling an earth armadillo with iridescent plating, was drinking from the stream. Mara recognized it as a Dravorn, a harmless herbivore native to Epsilon 9, and more importantly, a common prey animal for Zyrak packs. Where there were Dravorns, Zyrak wouldn't be far behind. Mara finished collecting water and retreated to her shelter, moving with deliberate quietness. Back at her camp, she set about preparing defenses, using more of the sturdy fronds. She constructed a series of simple alarm triggers around the perimeter. Nothing sophisticated, just arrangements of leaves and small stones that would create noise if disturbed. As Epsilon 9's dim day began to fade into night, Mara unpacked her thermal blanket and arranged her shelter for optimal protection. The temperature would drop significantly during the night cycle, and heat conservation would be critical. From her pack, she removed the metal container of dried herbs and the cylinder that had been her grandfather's. The herbs were a blend of earth plants, sage, rosemary, and a particular variety of mountain mint that produced a strong, distinctive aroma when burned. The cylinder was a simple fire starter, a relic from before humanity had developed energy weapons and environmental suits. It seemed primitive compared to Alliance technology, but it had one advantage. It was completely mechanical, requiring no power source that could fail. Mara arranged a small pile of dried fronds in front of her shelter and, using the fire starter, set them alight. The violet vegetation burned with a strange, blue-tinged flame that cast eerie shadows across the clearing. Into the fire, she sprinkled a pinch of the herbs. Almost immediately, a sharp, pungent scent filled the air, foreign to Epsilon 9, distinctly Terran. Mara settled back against her shelter, the fire between her and the darkness beyond. And then, she waited. They came just after midnight, moving with the silent efficiency of apex predators. Mara had been dozing lightly, but the subtle disturbance of one of her alarms brought her instantly alert. She remained motionless, controlling her breathing as her eyes adjusted to the darkness beyond the fire's glow. 6 pairs of reflective eyes stared back at her from the edge of the clearing, the Zyrak hunting pack. They were magnificent in a terrifying way, their sinewy bodies covered in short, dense fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their 6 limbs were arranged in a configuration that allowed them to move with equal efficiency on either 4 or 2 limbs, freeing the others for manipulation or attack. Their heads were dominated by those dual-hinged jaws, capable of opening wide enough to engulf a human head in a single bite. Mara didn't move. The Zyrak hadn't attacked immediately, which meant they were assessing her, trying to determine if this strange creature was prey, predator, or something else entirely. The fire clearly gave them pause. Few species on Epsilon 9 used controlled flame. Slowly, deliberately, Mara reached for her herb container. The lead Zyrak, a massive specimen with a distinctive scar across its snout, growled low in its throat. A warning. Mara froze, then continued her movement with exaggerated slowness, making sure the creatures could track her every action. She sprinkled more herbs onto the fire. The flames sputtered, then flared higher, releasing another wave of the strong earth scent into the air. The Zyrak pack shifted uneasily, clearly disturbed by the unfamiliar smell. Then, Mara did something no Alliance training manual would ever recommend. She began to sing. It was an old Earth song, a low, rhythmic chant her grandfather had taught her, a hunter's song from cultures long since absorbed into Earth's global society. The words themselves didn't matter. What mattered was the sound, the distinctly human vocalization that no species in the Alliance could quite replicate. The Zyrak pack reacted immediately, their bodies tensing as if preparing to flee or attack. The lead creature took a step forward, its jaws beginning to part in what Mera recognized as a dominance display. Without breaking her song, Mera reached for the fire starter again. With a quick motion, she ignited another handful of herbs and tossed them directly toward the lead Zyrak. The flames arced through the darkness, landing just short of the creature's feet. For a moment, the clearing was absolutely still, human and alien predators locked in a silent battle of wills. Then, to Mera's immense relief, the lead Zyrak took a step backward. It made a sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whine, and the entire pack melted back into the darkness of the forest. Mera continued her song for several more minutes, making sure the Zyrak were truly gone before allowing herself to relax slightly. She added more fuel to her fire and settled in for a long night of vigilance. The pack would be back. She had no doubt about that. But she had bought herself time. Time to strengthen her position, to study their behavior, to plan her next move. As the strange constellations of an alien sky wheeled overhead, Mera Kale, the human cadet that no one expected to survive, allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. First contact with the Zyrak pack, and she was still alive. Instructor Ron would have been disappointed. Unknown to Mera, her first encounter with the Zyrak pack had indeed been observed. Instructor Ron sat in the monitoring station orbiting Epsilon 9, his compound eyes fixed on the display before him. The hidden surveillance devices he had placed around the drop zone captured everything: the human's efficient construction of shelter, her careful assessment of the environment, and most surprisingly, her unorthodox but effective deterrence of the Zyrak pack. "Fascinating," murmured Trell, the station's Arcturian technician. His gelatinous form rippled with patterns that indicated deep interest. "I've never seen Zyrak retreat from a solitary target before." "They were confused, not retreating," Rian insisted, though he couldn't quite keep the note of uncertainty from his voice. "The human used fire and unfamiliar scents to disorient them. A clever tactic, but temporary at best." "And the vocalization?" Trell asked. "Most interesting response pattern from the Pack Alpha." Ran clicked his mandibles dismissively. "Coincidence. The Zyrak will return, and next time they won't be caught off guard by novel stimuli." "Perhaps," Trell agreed, his body pulsing with the Arcturian equivalent of a shrug. "Still, the human has survived the first night. That's more than many expected." Ron said nothing, but internally, he had to admit the same thought had occurred to him. The human cadet had shown resourcefulness and a surprising grasp of predator psychology. Still, one night was not 3 rotations, and Epsilon 9 had many more dangers than a single Zyrak pack. "Continue monitoring," he instructed Trell. "I want to be notified of any significant developments." As he left the monitoring station, Ron found himself genuinely curious about what the human would do next. Not that he expected her to survive the full assessment. Of course. That would be unprecedented. And Instructor Ron had very little patience for unprecedented events. Dawn on Epsilon 9 was a gradual affair. The gas giant that dominated the sky slowly revealed itself in hues of burnt orange and deep crimson, casting an otherworldly glow across the landscape. Mera awoke from her light doze, instantly alert. The fire had burned down to embers, but she had maintained it through the night, adding fuel at regular intervals. Her first task was to secure more water. The Zyrak would be less active during daylight hours, preferring to hunt in the dim light of dusk and dawn. That gave her a window of relative safety to strengthen her position and explore her surroundings further. After refreshing her water supply at the stream, Mera set about improving her shelter. Using techniques she had studied in xenobotany, she harvested sap from certain plants that, when exposed to air, hardened into a resin-like substance. With this natural adhesive, she reinforced her shelter structure, making it more weather-resistant and secure. Next, she set about constructing traps, Not for the Zyrak, which were far too intelligent and powerful to be caught by anything she could fashion from local materials, but for smaller creatures that might serve as bait or distractions in an emergency. By midday, she had set up 3 simple snare traps in locations where she had observed small animal activity. She had also expanded her perimeter alarms, creating a more comprehensive early warning system around her camp. As she worked, Mara kept a careful mental map of her surroundings, noting potential escape routes, defensive positions, and natural features that could be used to her advantage. One such feature particularly interested her: a deep ravine approximately half a kilometer south of her position. The ravine's walls were steep but navigable for someone with her climbing experience, and it offered multiple small caves and crevices that could serve as emergency shelter. Mara was examining one such cave when a faint sound reached her, a high-pitched keening that seemed to carry on the still air. Cautiously, she moved toward the source, keeping low and using the terrain for cover. In a small clearing, she found a juvenile Dravorn, its iridescent shell gleaming in the dim light. The creature was clearly in distress, one of its 6 legs caught in a natural crevice. As Mara watched, it struggled weakly, its energy nearly spent. Basic survival training dictated that she should ignore the creature. At best, it was a distraction from her own survival. At worst, its distress calls might attract predators. But Mara hesitated. The Dravorn was suffering, and something in her couldn't simply walk away. Moving slowly to avoid startling the creature further, Mara approached the trapped Dravorn. It froze at her approach, its multifaceted eyes tracking her movements with evident fear. "Easy," Mara murmured, knowing the creature couldn't understand her words, but hoping her tone might have a calming effect. "I'm not going to hurt you." With careful movements, she examined the crevice where the Dravorn's leg was trapped. The opening was narrow, but she thought she could widen it enough to free the creature without damaging the leg. Using her multi-tool, she began to carefully chip away at the stone. The Dravorn remained perfectly still, whether from fear or some instinctive understanding that she was trying to help. Mara couldn't tell. After several minutes of delicate work, she managed to create enough space for the creature to pull its leg free. The Dravorn scrambled back immediately, putting distance between itself and the strange being that had approached it. But rather than fleeing into the forest, it stopped a few meters away, regarding Mara with what seemed like curiosity. "You're welcome," Mara said with a small smile. "Now get going before something decides we both look like lunch." As if understanding her words, the Dravorn made a soft clicking sound and scurried off into the underbrush. Mara rose, brushing dust from her environmental suit, when a new sound froze her in place, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Slowly, she turned. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a Zyrak, but not just any Zyrak. This one was nearly twice the size of the pack members she had encountered the previous night. Its fur a deeper shade of midnight with silver streaking along its flanks. Its eyes were fixed on her with an intelligence that was unmistakable and deeply unsettling. A Vorkath, a solitary super-predator that even the Zyrak feared. Mara's mind raced through her limited options. Running was pointless. The Vorkath could outpace her easily. Fighting was equally futile. The creature's natural weapons outclassed anything she possessed. Her camp with its fire and alarms was too far away to reach. The Vorkath took a step forward, its massive form moving with a grace that belied its size. Its dual-hinged jaws parted slightly, revealing rows of serrated teeth. In that moment, Mara made a decision that no Alliance training protocol would ever endorse. Instead of attempting to flee or defend herself, she deliberately turned her back on the predator and knelt to examine the crevice where the Dravorn had been trapped, as if completely unaware of the deadly threat behind her. It was a desperate gamble, based on her study of predator psychology across multiple worlds. Many apex predators were triggered by flight responses in potential prey, by neither fleeing nor showing aggression. She was presenting the Vorkath with behavior outside its normal experience. For several heart-stopping seconds, nothing happened. Then, from the corner of her eye, Mara saw the Vorkath tilt its massive head. Its expression, if such an alien creature could be said to have expressions, showing what might have been confusion. Still moving with deliberate calmness, Mara rose and began walking away from both the crevice and the Vorkath. Not directly toward her camp, but at an angle that would eventually lead her there. She maintained a steady pace, neither hurried nor too slow, as if she were simply going about her business without concern. Behind her, she heard the Vorkath move, not in pursuit, but in a parallel path, keeping pace with her at a distance. It was following her, studying her, trying to categorize this strange creature that behaved like neither predator nor prey. Mara continued her measured walk, her heart pounding in her chest, but her exterior projecting only calm purpose. The strategy was working, for now. The Vorkath's curiosity was temporarily overriding its hunting instincts. But that balance wouldn't last forever. As she neared her camp, Mara began to formulate her next move. The fire would be crucial. The Vorkath, like the Zirak pack, would be wary of flame. But she needed more than just fire to deter a creature of this size and intelligence. An idea began to form in her mind, drawing on her knowledge of Earth's prehistoric hunters and the natural behaviors of Epsilon 9's apex predators. It was risky, bordering on reckless, but it might be her only chance to establish a deterrent strong enough to last the remaining 2 rotations of her assessment. Reaching her camp, Mara casually rebuilt her fire, still acting as if unaware of the massive predator watching from the tree line. As the flames caught and grew, she began unpacking various items from her survival kit, including the small heating unit designed for warming nutrient bars. The heating unit was simple but contained components that, if reconfigured, could serve a very different purpose. Working methodically, as if preparing a routine meal, Mara began to disassemble the device. With deft movements, she rearranged its power cell and heating element, creating what was essentially a crude concussive device, not powerful enough to seriously harm the Vorkath, but certainly enough to startle and disorient it. As she worked, Mara began her song again, the same rhythmic chant she had used the previous night. The Vorkath's reaction was immediate and visible. It drew back slightly into the foliage, its eyes narrowing as it assessed this new development. Mara completed her improvised device and set it aside, then returned to normal camp activities, checking her water supply, examining her shelter, all while maintaining her song at a low, constant volume. The Vorkath remained at the perimeter, watching, waiting. As the day began to wane toward evening, Mara knew she would need to act soon. The Vorkath would be most active during the transition from day to night, and its patience with this strange potential prey would eventually run out. Gathering the last components she needed, a length of fibrous plant material, as a makeshift fuse, and her fire starter, Mara prepared for her most dangerous gambit yet. She would need to lead the Vorkath to the ravine she had explored earlier, using herself as bait, and deploy her device at precisely the right moment to send the creature over the edge. It was a plan with 1,000 ways to fail, and only one narrow path to success. But as the alien sun began to set behind the gas giant, casting long shadows across Epsilon 9's surface, Mara Kale of Earth faced the reality of her situation. Conventional survival methods wouldn't work against a Vorkath. Innovation, the hallmark of her species, was her only hope. Setting her jaw with determination, Mara began the next phase of her plan, fully aware that the next few hours would determine whether she lived to see another Earth sunrise or became just another statistic in the Academy's records. The human cadet who proved, in death, what many already believed. that humans had no place among the stars. In the monitoring station, Instructor Ron watched the unfolding scenario with increasing disbelief. "The human is deliberately engaging a Vorkath," he stated, his voice flat with shock. "This defies all rational survival protocols." Trell's gelatinous form pulsed with excitement. "Yet observe the Vorkath's behavior. It's exhibiting investigation patterns rather than standard hunting sequences. Most unprecedented." Ryan's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation among his species. "Unprecedented or not, it's suicide. The human cannot possibly—" He broke off, watching as Mara calmly continued her preparations while maintaining that strange vocalization. "What is she doing with the heating unit?" Trell's sensory appendages extended toward the display, analyzing the feed. "It appears she is reconfiguring the power cell to create, a concussive discharge device. Quite ingenious, actually." "It's forbidden to alter standard equipment," Ron said automatically, though without much conviction. Survival assessments had always operated under an unspoken, by any means necessary approach, provided cadets didn't bring unauthorized technology with them. "She's moving," Trell noted, as Mara began to gather her improvised device and a few other supplies. "Heading south, toward the ravine complex, if I'm not mistaken." Rand's compound eyes narrowed. "She's attempting to lure the Vorkath into a trap." Despite himself, a note of reluctant admiration crept into his voice. "Ambitious, foolhardy, but ambitious." "Should we prepare an emergency extraction team?" Trell asked, his tone neutral, but the patterns rippling across his form, indicating concern. Rain hesitated. Emergency extraction was available for situations of immediate, life-threatening danger, beyond the parameters of the assessment. A Vorkath certainly qualified. But extraction would also mean automatic failure for Cadet Kale. And some instinct he couldn't quite articulate, made him pause. "Continue monitoring," he decided, "but have an extraction team on standby." As Trell relayed the orders, Ron couldn't help but wonder what the human cadet was thinking. No species he knew would deliberately place themselves between a Vorkath and its territory. It was either the height of foolishness or something else entirely. For the first time since the assessment began, Instructor Ron found himself genuinely uncertain about the outcome. Mara moved through the violet undergrowth with careful deliberation, neither too fast nor too slow. The ravine was approximately 15 minutes' walk from her camp, close enough to reach before full darkness fell, but far enough that she would be completely isolated from the relative safety of her fire and shelter. In her pack, she carried her improvised concussive device, her fire starter, and a small container of the aromatic herbs that had proven effective at disorienting the Zyrak pack. She had also fashioned a crude spear from a straight branch and the cutting edge of her multi-tool. Not that she harbored any illusions about its effectiveness against a Vorkath, but having some form of weapon provided a psychological comfort, if nothing else. Behind her, moving like a shadow through the deep purple foliage, the Vorkath followed. It maintained a distance of about 30 meters, close enough to strike if it chose, but far enough to observe and assess. The creature was hunting her. Mara knew, but it was hunting her differently than it would hunt normal prey. Her abnormal behavior had triggered its curiosity, giving her a precious window of opportunity. As she neared the ravine, Mara began to modify her path, angling toward a section where the edge was partially obscured by dense vegetation. Her plan hinged on the Vorkath not recognizing the danger until it was too late. She also needed to position herself so that when the creature charged, as it inevitably would, she would have enough time to deploy her device and move clear of the edge herself. The ravine came into view, a jagged tear in Epsilon 9's surface that plunged nearly 50 meters straight down, before opening into a series of stepped ledges. In the fading light, its depths were already lost to shadow. Mara positioned herself about 5 meters from the edge, her back to the ravine, as if unaware of its presence. Then, for the first time since leaving her camp, she turned to directly face the Vorkath. The massive predator had emerged from the tree line and stood watching her, its powerful limbs tensed and ready. In the dim twilight, its eyes glowed with an inner light that reflected nothing but pure, predatory intent. "All right," Mara said softly, more to steady herself than to communicate with the creature. "Let's dance." From her pack, she withdrew her container of herbs and sprinkled a generous amount onto the ground before her. Then, using her fire starter, she ignited them. The herbs caught quickly, producing a sharp, pungent smoke that rose in a blue-tinged column between her and the Vorkath. The creature growled, a deep, rumbling sound that Mara felt in her chest more than heard. It took a step forward, then paused, clearly wary of the strange smoke. Mara began her chant again, the rhythmic sounds rising and falling in patterns designed to confuse and disorient. The Vorkath's massive head swayed from side to side, its sensory pits flaring as it processed the unfamiliar stimuli. Then, with a roar that seemed to shake the very air, it charged. Mara had been anticipating this moment, had been mentally rehearsing her movements. As the enormous predator launched itself toward her, she activated her improvised device, hurled it directly into the Vorkath's path, and dove to the side in a controlled roll. The device detonated with a sharp crack and a blinding flash, not powerful enough to seriously harm the Vorkath, but more than sufficient to disorient a creature whose senses were already confused by the smoke and unfamiliar sounds. The Vorkath, unable to halt its charge, plunged straight through the space where Mara had been standing moments before. There was a moment of terrible stillness as the creature realized its mistake, its claws scrabbling for purchase at the ravine's edge. Then, with a roar of fury that echoed across the landscape, it disappeared over the edge. Mara scrambled to her feet and rushed to look over the rim, careful not to get too close to the crumbling edge. Far below, she could see the Vorkath had landed on one of the stepped ledges, about 30 meters down. The creature was moving, clearly injured but very much alive. And even from this distance, Mara could feel the weight of its gaze as it looked up at her, a mixture of rage and something that might almost be respect. "Sorry about that," Mara called down, the adrenaline making her voice shakier than she would have liked. "Nothing personal." The Vorkath snarled, but made no attempt to scale the sheer walls of the ravine. It seemed to understand that this particular prey was now beyond its reach. Mara backed away from the edge, her legs suddenly weak with relief and residual fear. She had survived an encounter with one of the most dangerous predators in this sector of the galaxy. Not just survived, but prevailed through strategy rather than strength. As she made her way back to her camp, moving swiftly before full darkness fell, Mara allowed herself to acknowledge what this meant. She had passed the most difficult test Epsilon 9 could present. The remaining 2 rotations would still be challenging. She would need to maintain vigilance, manage her resources, and deal with whatever other dangers the alien moon might present. But she had proven that humans, despite their physical limitations, could adapt and survive in environments that would challenge even the most naturally equipped species. At her camp, Mara rebuilt her fire to a roaring blaze and allowed herself to consume one of her precious nutrient bars. Tomorrow, she would need to check her traps for smaller prey and perhaps explore further to find edible vegetation. She would also need to reinforce her shelter against Epsilon 9's acidic rainstorms, which tended to occur during the second day of each local rotation cycle. But for now, in the dancing light of her fire, Mara Kale of Earth permitted herself a moment of quiet pride. She had faced the void and its dangers, and she had not flinched. Somewhere in orbit above her, she imagined Instructor Ron watching through whatever surveillance devices were undoubtedly monitoring her assessment. She wondered what the Orvelian was thinking now about human capabilities. With a small smile, Mara settled back against her shelter to keep watch through the alien night, the strange constellations of an unfamiliar sky wheeling overhead, marking the slow passage of time toward extraction and vindication. "Impossible," Ron muttered, his compound eyes fixed on the monitoring display. "Completely impossible." Beside him, Trell's gelatinous form rippled with excitement patterns so intense they were almost painful to look at. "Yet we observed it. Instructor." The human deliberately lured the Vorkath into a tactically disadvantageous position and successfully neutralized the threat without deploying lethal force. "She used bait," Ron insisted, though the argument sounded weak even to his own auditory receptors. "Herself as bait. No rational species would—" "Perhaps that is precisely the point," interrupted a new voice. Rain turned to find Director Voss standing in the monitoring station's entrance, her scaled form gleaming in the artificial light. "Director, I didn't realize you were observing the assessment." "I wasn't," Voss replied, moving to stand beside the displays. "Until reports of unprecedented predator responses began circulating through the Academy channels." She gestured toward the screen, showing Mara's camp, where the human was calmly reinforcing her shelter, as if she hadn't just survived an encounter that would have challenged the Academy's most elite cadets. "Explain what I've missed, Instructor." Ron clicked his mandibles in what his species recognized as resigned frustration. The human cadet has displayed unexpected adaptability. She successfully deterred a Zyrak hunting pack using controlled fire and auditory confusion tactics, rescued a juvenile Dravorn from a natural trap, and most recently, lured a Vorkath to a ravine edge where it fell to a lower ledge. The Vorkath survives, but is effectively neutralized as a threat. "Fascinating," Voss murmured, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "And she accomplished this without specialized equipment, using only the standard survival kit? Plus some items she brought with her," Rian admitted. "Dried plant matter from Terra that produces strong aromatic compounds when burned. A primitive fire-starting device. Nothing that violates assessment protocols," he added quickly. "But used in creative ways." "Creative," Voss repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes, I suppose that is the term. Humans have always emphasized their creativity as a core strength, haven't they? We've tended to dismiss it as compensation for their obvious physical deficiencies. But perhaps," she trailed off, watching the display thoughtfully. "Director, I feel compelled to point out that luck played a significant role in the cadet's survival thus far," Rahan said. "The Vorkath could easily have—" "Luck is simply preparation meeting opportunity, Instructor," Voss interrupted. "An old Terran saying, I believe. How much longer in her assessment period?" "Approximately 2 rotations, Director." Voss nodded. "Continue monitoring. I want a full report on all of her adaptive strategies, no matter how unorthodox they may seem by our standards." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Instructor Ron." "Yes, Director?" "I believe you made a promise to Cadet Kale before her deployment. Something about the Tactical Vanguard program?" Rand's exoskeleton seemed to tighten uncomfortably. "A motivational tactic, Director. Surely you don't suggest—" "I suggest nothing, Instructor. I merely remind you that the Academy takes promises seriously, even those made to unexpected candidates." With that, Director Voss departed, leaving Ron staring at the monitoring displays with new unease. Beside him, Trell made a sound that in his species passed for laughter. "It appears, Instructor, that your educational experiment may have unexpected consequences." Rand's mandibles clicked rapidly in agitation. 2 rotations, he muttered. "Much can still happen in 2 rotations." But as he watched the human cadet methodically preparing for Epsilon 9's acidic rain cycle, with a calm efficiency that spoke of thorough preparation, Ron found himself wondering, not for the first time, if perhaps the Alliance's assessment of human capabilities had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. The second day on Epsilon 9 brought the expected acid rain, a steady downpour of caustic droplets that hissed and steamed where they struck vegetation. Mara remained in her reinforced shelter, which held up admirably against the corrosive precipitation. She used the forced downtime to take inventory of her supplies, plan her movements for when the rain cleared, and rest, true rest, rather than the vigilant dozing she had managed thus far. By midday, the rain had subsided, leaving the landscape shrouded in a thin mist that rose from the still wet vegetation. Mara emerged cautiously, testing the air with her suit's external sensors to ensure the caustic elements had dissipated sufficiently. Her first task was to check the simple traps she had set the previous day. 2 were empty, but the third had captured a small, insect-like creature with a hard carapace and multiple sets of delicate wings. It wasn't much, but it represented a potential food source if her nutrient bars ran out. After resetting the traps, Mara set about exploring more of her surroundings, focusing on identifying potentially useful resources and mapping the terrain for strategic advantages. She was particularly interested in finding certain types of fungi that her studies had indicated grew in Epsilon 9's forests and could serve as natural antiseptics if properly processed. As she moved through the misty undergrowth, Mara maintained constant awareness of her surroundings, alert for any sign of predators. The Zyrak pack would likely have relocated after their encounter with the Vorkath. Apex predators rarely shared territory, but other dangers undoubtedly lurked in the alien forest. About a kilometer from her camp, Mara discovered what she had been searching for, a cluster of pale, luminescent fungi growing at the base of a rock formation. Careful not to touch them directly, she harvested several specimens using her multi-tool and stored them in a sealed container from her pack. On her return journey, a faint sound caught her attention, a familiar clicking that made her freeze in her tracks. Slowly, she turned toward the source of the noise. The juvenile Dravorn she had rescued stood a few meters away, its iridescent shell gleaming in the filtered light. It made that clicking sound again, its multifaceted eyes fixed on her with what seemed like recognition. "Hello again," Mara said softly. "I see you're doing better." The Dravorn took a tentative step toward her, then another. Mara remained perfectly still, fascinated by the creature's behavior. Most Epsilon 9 wildlife avoided all contact with off-worlders. Yet this Dravorn was approaching her deliberately. When it was just a meter away, the creature extended one of its forelimbs, revealing something clutched in its grasping appendage, a small, glittering object that caught the dim light. Mara carefully extended her hand, and the Dravorn dropped the item into her palm before backing away slightly. It was a crystal, not a natural formation, but something clearly manufactured, with precise facets and a core that seemed to pulse with inner light. Mara recognized it immediately as a data crystal, a storage medium used by certain Alliance species. What it was doing on Epsilon 9, and how the Dravorn had acquired it, were mysteries she couldn't begin to unravel. "Thank you," she said to the creature, not knowing if it could understand her words, but certain it was intelligent enough to comprehend her tone. "This is unexpected." The Dravorn made a series of rapid clicks, then turned and scurried into the underbrush, disappearing from view. Mara examined the crystal carefully. Without proper equipment, she couldn't access whatever data it might contain, but its presence on Epsilon 9 was significant. Either someone had lost it here, unlikely, given the moon's restricted status as a training ground, or it had been deliberately placed for some reason. She secured the crystal in an inner pocket of her environmental suit. Whether it was relevant to her assessment or not, It represented a mystery worth investigating once she returned to the academy. The remainder of the day passed without incident. Mara reinforced her camp further, harvested more of the sturdy fronds to create a rain shield for her fire, and prepared for her final night on Epsilon 9. Tomorrow, if all went well, she would return to the extraction point and complete her assessment successfully. A human cadet who had not merely survived, but thrived in an environment deemed hostile, even by Alliance standards. As twilight descended once more, Mara maintained her fire and settled into her vigilant routine. The events of the past 2 days had tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated, but they had also confirmed what she had always believed, that humanity's place among the stars wasn't defined by physical attributes, but by adaptability, creativity, and the innate drive to overcome challenges that had propelled her species from cave dwellings to space travel in a mere flicker of cosmic time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she knew. But for now, in the dancing light of her fire under an alien sky, Mara Kale of Earth allowed herself to believe that perhaps, in some small way, she had begun to change perceptions about humanity's role in the Galactic Alliance. The third and final day of Mara's assessment dawned clear and still, the gas giant hanging in the sky like a watchful eye. She dismantled her camp methodically, leaving as little trace of her presence as possible, both out of respect for Epsilon 9's ecosystem and to demonstrate proper Alliance protocol. The extraction point was a 2-hour walk from her location, giving her ample time to reach it before the scheduled pickup. As she made her final preparations, a rustling in the undergrowth alerted her to a visitor. The juvenile Dravorn had returned, accompanied this time by 2 larger specimens that Mara assumed were its parents or guardians. The 3 creatures watched her from the edge of the clearing, making no move to approach, but clearly observing her activities with interest. Mara nodded to them in acknowledgement, then shouldered her pack and began her journey toward the extraction point. The Dravorns followed at a distance, their iridescent shells occasionally visible through the violet foliage. Their behavior was unprecedented. Epsilon 9's wildlife typically avoided all contact with off-worlders, but Mara found their presence oddly comforting. About halfway to the extraction point, the Dravorns suddenly scattered, disappearing into the undergrowth with alarmed clicking sounds. Mara froze, instantly alert. Something had spooked them, something they perceived as a threat. She scanned her surroundings carefully, her hand moving to the makeshift spear she still carried. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the familiar purple landscape of Epsilon 9. Then, a movement at the corner of her vision caught her attention. A Zirak, not from the pack she had encountered on her first night, but a solitary individual with distinctive markings that indicated advanced age. It stood watching her from a distance, its posture not aggressive but alert. Mara remained still, evaluating her options. The Zirak was between her and the extraction point, but it wasn't behaving like a predator stalking prey. If anything, it seemed to be waiting, making a decision. Mara resumed walking, maintaining her course but giving the Zirak a wide berth. To her surprise, the creature moved parallel to her, keeping pace but maintaining distance. It was escorting her, or perhaps herding her, toward the extraction point. As they neared the clearing where she had first been deposited 3 days ago, Mara saw the Zirak stop at the tree line. It made a sound, not a growl or roar, but a complex vocalization she couldn't interpret, then melted back into the forest. The clearing was empty, the shuttle not yet arrived for extraction. Mara checked her timepiece. She was early, with approximately 40 minutes until scheduled pickup. She used the time to organize her notes and observations, documenting everything she had learned about Epsilon 9's ecosystem and its inhabitants. As she worked, she became aware of movement at the edge of the clearing. Not just one creature, but many. The Dravorns had returned, along with the elderly Zirak and, to her astonishment, several members of the pack she had encountered on her first night. They remained in the shadows of the tree line, watching her with what seemed like collective curiosity. "Quite an audience for my departure," Mira murmured, fascinated by this unprecedented gathering of species that normally existed in strict predator-prey relationships. The sound of approaching engines drew her attention skyward. The extraction shuttle was descending toward the clearing, its sleek form gleaming in the alien sunlight. As it touched down, the assembled wildlife retreated further into the forest, all except the juvenile Dravorn, which made a final series of clicks before disappearing after the others. The shuttle's hatch opened to reveal Instructor Ron, his expression unreadable behind his alien features. "Cadet Kale," he acknowledged, his tone carefully neutral. "I see you have survived your assessment." "Yes, Instructor," Mara replied simply, gathering her pack and approaching the shuttle. As she boarded, Ron's compound eyes studied her with evident curiosity. "You appear remarkably intact for someone who has spent 3 rotations in Epsilon 9's northern sector." "I followed protocols and adapted to circumstances as they arose, Instructor," Mara said, taking her seat in the shuttle. "Exactly as my training prescribed." Ron made that clicking sound that Mara had come to recognize as his equivalent of a skeptical snort. "Your adaptation included luring a Vorkath to a ravine edge and creating an improvised concussive device from standard equipment." So he had been watching. Mara had suspected as much but hadn't been certain. "The assessment parameters stated survival by any means necessary, Instructor. I used the tools and knowledge available to me." "Indeed." Ron's mandibles moved in a pattern Mara couldn't interpret. "Your methods were unconventional." "My methods were human," Mara corrected gently. "We've always relied on adaptability rather than natural defenses." The shuttle lifted off, rising through Epsilon 9's thin atmosphere toward the Academy station in orbit. Through the viewport, Mara watched the alien landscape recede, the violet forests, the jagged rock formations, the deep ravines, all challenges she had faced and overcome. "I will be filing my official assessment report upon our return," Ron said as they approached the station. "Your performance will be evaluated according to standard protocols." "Of course, Instructor," Mara replied. "And our agreement? Regarding the Tactical Vanguard program?" Ron's compound eyes fixed on her with new intensity. "You remember that?" "I do." For a long moment, the Orvelian was silent, his alien features impossible for Mara to read. Then, to her surprise, he inclined his head in what his species recognized as reluctant respect. "I will honor our agreement. Cadet Kale, your recommendation for the Tactical Vanguard program will be included in my report." Mara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The Tactical Vanguard was the elite of the elite, comprised almost exclusively of species from high-gravity, predator-evolved worlds. No human had ever been considered for the program, let alone recommended. As the shuttle docked with the Academy station, Mara gathered her belongings, including the mysterious data crystal the Dravorn had given her. That was a puzzle for another day. For now, she had accomplished what she had set out to do, not just to survive Epsilon 9, but to prove that humans deserve their place among the stars. "Cadet Kale," Ron said as they prepared to disembark. "One question, if I may." "Yes, Instructor?" "The Zyrak pack on your first night. They retreated from fire and sound. A logical response. But the Vorkath. Why did it follow you to the ravine? Vorkath are apex predators with highly developed survival instincts. It should have recognized the danger." Mara considered the question carefully. "I believe it was curiosity, Instructor. I presented a puzzle it couldn't solve. Prey that didn't act like prey. For a predator that relies on pattern recognition, an anomaly can be distracting. And you exploited this distraction. I used my understanding of predator psychology to create an advantage where I had none physically. Mara corrected. Isn't that what tactical thinking is about? Using knowledge as a force multiplier. Ryan's mandibles moved in a pattern that, had he been human, might have been a thoughtful frown. Perhaps you are more suited to the tactical vanguard than I initially believed. Cadet. It wasn't quite an apology for his earlier dismissiveness, but Mara recognized it as the closest thing to one she was likely to receive from the proud Orvelian. Thank you, instructor. I look forward to the opportunity to prove that further. As they entered the academy station, Mara was greeted by a small crowd of fellow cadets, including her roommate Srel, whose pearlescent skin was pulsing with patterns of excitement and relief. "You're alive!" Srel exclaimed, her musical voice carrying through the docking bay. "When we heard about the Vorkath—" "News travels fast," Mara observed with a small smile. "It's all anyone's been talking about for the past rotation," Srel confirmed. "The human cadet who outsmarted a Vorkath. Some of the instructors have been reviewing the surveillance feeds as teaching examples." Mara felt a flush of pride at that, though she tried not to show it. "I just did what was necessary to complete my assessment." "What you did," came a new voice, "was demonstrate a principle that the Alliance sometimes forgets." Mara turned to find Director Voss approaching, her scaled form towering over the assembled cadets, who quickly moved aside to create a path for her. "Director," Mara acknowledged, standing at attention. "At ease. Cadet Kale." Voss's 4 eyes studied her with evident interest. "I've reviewed the preliminary reports of your assessment performance. Most illuminating." "Thank you, Director. I understand Instructor Ron has recommended you for the Tactical Vanguard program," Voss continued, her gaze shifting briefly to the Orvelian, who inclined his head in confirmation. "He has, Director." "Good, because I was prepared to override him if he hadn't." Voss's scales shifted from emerald to azure, a sign of approval among her species. The Alliance was founded on the principle that diversity of perspective and ability strengthens us all. Yet, over time, we've fallen into patterns of thinking that categorize species by their obvious physical attributes, rather than their potential. Mara remained silent, sensing that the director wasn't finished. "Your performance on Epsilon 9 has reminded me, that true strength in the void comes in many forms." Voss turned to address the assembled cadets and instructors. "Let this be a lesson to all. We measure capability not by what is obvious, but by what is demonstrated through action. Cadet Kale has earned her place among us not despite being human, but because of the unique perspective her humanity brings." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd, some approving, some uncertain, but all respectful. Mara stood straight, feeling the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. She had proven herself, yes, but this was just the beginning. Now she would have to live up to that proof, day after day, mission after mission. "Report to medical for standard post-assessment evaluation," Director Voss instructed. "Once cleared, you'll be briefed on the Tactical Vanguard program requirements." She paused, then added, "And Cadet Kale?" "Yes, Director. Welcome to the True Alliance, not as a guest, but as an equal." As Mara made her way through the station corridors toward the medical bay, she felt a sense of quiet accomplishment wash over her. She had faced the void and its dangers, and she had not flinched. She had proven that humans, with all their supposed weaknesses and limitations, belonged among the stars. And perhaps, in some small way, she had begun to change the future of both humanity and the Galactic Alliance. In the training bay of the Academy's flagship vessel, where the elite of the Tactical Vanguard prepared for missions that would take them to the far reaches of known space, a new name appeared on the roster: Mara Kale of Terra, the cadet from a Deathworld who had faced the predators of Epsilon 9 and emerged not just alive, but victorious. The void, with all its wonders and terrors, awaited. And Mara Kale was ready.